Jonathan mentioned, I think today's the last Sunday in our 6-week series, asking the question, what is the role of the church? And I don't know about you, but I think that Joanne and Tony and the music teams and the choir have done an amazing job at tackling this huge question. And I will say, I've been going to church for 35 years, a couple of weeks break here and there. And I'm really grateful to get to work with Joanne, somebody who cares about that question more than anybody I've met, and cares about the ability that we have as a church and a community to bring meaning and healing into people's lives. So I hope you feel that way too. Today's theme is called to love. As a church, we are called to love. And I wanted to talk about my grandfather today. And there's a picture of him that's going to come up here. Luckily, he quit smoking. But that's him and my grandma Rocker in their little place in upstate New York. And I wanted to talk about him because when I think about love and when I think about the changes that have to occur in us in order to truly love well, I think of him and I think of some shifts that I saw in him over the years that we're going to explore a little bit. And there's one other picture that I want to show you. You get to see what I looked like at 14. I know it's a shock to some of you. It's okay. I was still gay then, but my hair is way better now. And so that's my grandpa a few years after the first picture, and I'll be talking a little bit more about him. But today, most of the music selections were chosen by me because they were favorite songs of his. And so before I continue, we're going to hear one of those songs, Big Rock Candy Mountain, and feel free to sing along if you know it. My grandpa would think this is the best service ever if that song was played in church. He was just like this song. He was memorable and weird and fun and full of sugar. He passed away in 2002, and there are a lot of memories that are a little bit more blurry for me, but many that won't fade. When I was 7, my family moved from New York to Texas, and this meant that I wouldn't be seeing my grandparents all the time anymore, and that was the big thing that really devastated me. And so for many years, I would go each summer and spend a month or two with my grandparents, and I learned some really important lessons in those times. And one of the things was that, you know, you should never agree to sleep in the living room while your cousin gets the bedroom because your grandparents have a television on in the living room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And on this television, there were 2 things that were played, and one was NASCAR races, and the other was country music television. And I don't know if you've met me, but those aren't my 2 favorite things. And you will learn every country song that was ever written in the 90s, and you will never be able to forget. The other thing I learned was that my grandparents were really unique, and there was a lot of things I loved about them that I should never emulate, such as at every meal, at lunch and dinner, they would each have 3 pieces of white Wonder Bread covered in margarine, no matter what else they were eating. It was amazing. My mom never let me do that. And there are many things that you'll love about them that you should emulate, which is doing something right to make your grandkids love you so much that they'll come and visit you, even when they're going to gain an all too intimate knowledge of the difference between a Mark Chestnut and a Kenny Chesney. Those who know country music got that. I really loved spending time with my grandfather, and there's a lot of things I see in myself that remind me of him. He taught me how to play almost every card game, including poker. By the time I was 5, I knew how to bluff really well. And I couldn't understand why my 5-year-old friends didn't know what hold'em meant. We were often running around in his Ford Taurus because Fords were the best in his mind. Ford Taurus, he just bought one after another his whole life. And we'd go to the post office just to watch people. And we would go to the grocery store and we would buy pastries that he was not allowed to have. As you can see, this is an exception. There's some cream horns in this picture. But most of the time we would go and you'd be in the parking lot eating 3 each and hiding the evidence. One thing that confused me about him was that he was so different from the person I heard about, what he used to be. This fun and loving guy who I have so many great memories with was actually quite a harsh man in his earlier years. And I heard stories of his anger and the fear he invoked in others, and how he never helped with housework because that was the woman's job. And it seemed he held on to this idea that being a real man meant that you could show no emotions or vulnerability. And I found it hard to accept these stories, but I knew that they were true from the folks I heard. And I knew with some sadness that if he hadn't chosen to change, I never would have had the chance to know him like I did. So I've wondered, what incited his transformation? And what perhaps can we learn from that? The scripture that was read today, Psalm 131, represents another transformation that greatly affected me. The psalmist David is writing about his connection with God, and one of the lines reads, "Of one thing I am certain, my soul has become calm, quiet, and contented in you. Like a weaned child resting upon his mother, I am quiet. My soul is like this weaned child." And it may seem like just another psalm, but for me, when I really read it, it changed something, because the image of God in this passage is very female. David tells us that he feels like a weaned child resting upon his mother, an intimate, tender, nurturing presence. And when I first really got this, I was blown away, because this is not how God was described to me, or how God was talked about for the majority of my life. I was told that yes, God loved me, but that he was also an old, angry, white guy who was way more interested in the naughty or nice list than with being able to see and feel that I was loved. And it was always an image of a male God, and that because God is male, we should take him seriously. And this isn't healthy or accurate, we know that. But people forgot to remind me that in the very first chapter of this Bible, it says that God created humankind in God's image, which means that God is in all of us. God is all genders and no genders. God is male and female and transgender and non-binary and two-spirit and every other expression of gender. And yet, in Western culture, we're so obsessed with this idea of God that oozes this toxic masculinity, which is so dangerous because it removes us from the reality that we shouldn't be motivated out of fear or use fear as a tool, but trust that we are all sacred. Just like in the video that we watched, the truth is that all of our identities are an expression of God, including the smallest of these among us. and that any suppression of others is a suppression of God, and ultimately a suppression of ourselves. And here's where the stories that I heard, both about my grandfather and about God, converge. For my grandfather, he was the one who transformed from his old behavior and embraced this softer part of himself when we think about the intimate, tender, nurturing nature. And with God, it was my perception that was transformed until I knew that I was free to let go of that image I was told about and free myself to think about something deeper. When I started writing this sermon, I thought I would, well, hi. You know, most women don't listen to me with this much interest, so this is nice. Hi. Go ahead, explore, play. I thought I would uncover the reason behind why my grandfather changed and why he transformed. And I really thought, do you want me to hold you? No, okay. And I really thought that I would, in this discovery of this, I would know and I would get to see why he changed, but I didn't at all. I thought maybe his health, or maybe the ultimatum of a loved one, or maybe a self-help book. But what I do know for sure is that it shows me that if we choose it, we are always invited into a deeper way of living that allows us to be free. And in that, to flourish into more of who we are and let others do the same. My grandfather made a choice, and I don't know when. And I know that he had to live with the consequences of the people he hurt, because I knew people he hurt, and he had to carry that. But I'd like to think that he started listening to the question that's inside of all of us. What does love look like? And what is my role in that? And that in freeing himself to love, I was able to experience it. I was able to go with him and eat 3 cream horns in the car in his Ford Taurus. And in the same way, as a church, we ask ourselves, what does love look like? Often when I have conversations with families who are struggling with their children, and usually they're adult or teen children, and they're struggling with accepting them, and they don't know if they'll ever get to a point where they'll agree on something, I'll ask them to reflect, in this situation, no matter if you ever agree or not, what does love look like? And that is what we are called to do as a church. The poet Maya Angelou suggests that there are 4 questions that we're all unconsciously asking each other all of the time. And they're almost always silent questions, because they're almost always unconscious. And when the silent answer to each of these 4 silent questions is a definitive yes, the love or basic sense of humanity in the relationship becomes more palpable and is in turn immediately felt. And these questions are, do you see me? Do you care that I'm here? Am I enough for you, or do you need me to be better in some way? And can I tell that I'm special by the way you look at me? In a romantic context, there's all sorts of things that can happen when we don't get the answers we want or deserve from these questions. But in the broader context, people who don't get an answer to these questions, or worse, get a no to these questions, feel increasingly disconnected from any sense of community. I see you. I'm answering these questions, yes. So instead of asking ourselves why certain people, certain demographics aren't interested in the church. We have to turn inward and ask ourselves, what are our answers to these questions when people are in our midst? Do we see them? Do we care that they're here? Do we want them to be better in some way? And can they tell they're special? And this is controversial perhaps for a church, but I also think we are called to hold people accountable for whom the answers to those questions is no. For some people, we'll say no to those, and that's okay. And those who aren't ready to say yes perhaps need to step back, because boundaries are what love looks like too. We are called to embody the love of God that is not stuck in a box. Because we aren't acting in certain ways to earn approval from this old guy in the sky, this idea of something we've heard about. It's something real that is happening right now and revealing itself in our lives today. And because we are loved already, we can be inspired and empowered to live this love. I want to end with a short poem that I wrote for my grandpa. And right after I finish, we'll get to sing and listen to his favorite song and a little bit of background. So whenever they visited Texas, they loved going to the rodeo with us. And so I've seen more rodeos than anybody who loves the Stampede. And it was great. He had this huge belt buckle that he would wear, and his stomach kind of came over it, so he had to kind of pull his stomach up so he could see it. And he had this big black cowboy hat, and he would wear a bolo tie, and he was actually way more country than anybody I knew in Texas. But he really loved it, and he had to get there in time when the rodeo started, because at the beginning of the rodeo, they would play Orange Blossom Special at the beginning, and he had to hear it. So after this poem, the band is going to play for us, and it's going to be great. It's anyone's game, he says, and with wild eyes he smiles. Deuce is wild, and his tea bag dances in his mug. He swallows, and a ripple passes down his Adam's apple, drifting down a throat covered in prickly gray whiskers. The cards are dealt, and he holds his hands close. With eyes that bluff, he smiles to show that no teeth are at home behind his pink lips. I watch his blue eyes, blue like mine, blue like clouds behind sunshine, blue like berries. I can see my dad in his face, but he's not like my dad, not now. My dad doesn't smile like this, not yet. I think maybe in 30 years, my dad will get a smile in the mail. While I hypothesize, his eyes lie, and I know his hands hold way less than his mouth promises. I raise the bet to show I know how the game is played. His fingers drum and calculate the risk. Fingers puffy and swollen from a disease that makes his joints scream. Who wants ice cream? He says. I do. But it's a trick, a distraction. I remain calm while dreaming of cookies and cream. You see, he's a creature I haven't quite figured out yet. I've marveled at his beard like a well-trimmed version of Santa Claus. And he is jolly. But then I've heard about the way he yells or yelled, and a temper that flared and popped like a Roman candle at midnight. But I can't imagine that right now. As he sits across from me, drinking tea, with rosy cheeks and the laugh of a child, and his voice makes me feel like everything's going to be all right. What is the secret, I wonder, between being changed on purpose or by accident? You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. The sound of country music blares from the living room where the TV is locked in a place where Shania Twain tells me she's shaved her legs. And Alan Jackson's telling me that the Chattahoochee is hotter than Hoochie Coochie, but I don't know what that means yet. But he beams when he visits the rodeo. And the opening band plays the Orange Blossom Special on the fiddle. And now he calls the bet, and I'm set to win. Sure, I'm small, but I know when to hold him. His hands show his cards, hands that are soft from a morning of dishes. Dishes he cleaned with love because, I don't know. I heard he would have never done this before, never washed the floor or do any chore a woman would do. But I can't imagine that right now. As he sits across from me and I steal a kiss on his cheek, and his laugh makes me feel like sunshine. What's the secret, I wonder, between growing up and just growing? You got to know when to walk away, know when to run. I lay my cards on the table, lay my heart on the table, and I've won. I've won the nickels, his heart, the ice cream. The victory is sweet as his bald forehead and the sound of fiddlers on a hot day. And I pray that someday I'll grow up to be like him. Not the one I heard about, but the one I see right across from me. Except with more teeth. He shuffles the cards and deals again. It's anyone's game, he says, and winks at me. Amen.